this is Tchipakkan, and welcome to the Otherworldly, the show from Changing Times, Changing Worlds, where we cover all kinds of weird and interesting topics. And tonight we're going to be talking about, I wanted to revisit the concept of the elements, because I was reminded when Ivo Domingos was here that we don't have the okay, here's your grammar school version of everything you need to know to start understanding the world in a magical perspective. And so it's something I think that there are certain things that you kind of have to know in a to start off with. And I think probably the chances are most of the people here have encountered them, but let's just make sure that everybody has the basics, because they're useful. That's why they call them the basics. I would say that we will start out with saying that the four elements are a Western magical tradition. They're in China. They have 5. They have 4 or 5 in Ayurveda, but we'll just let's stick to the very basics of Western magic right now. It was Aristotle talked about everything being made of combinations of elements, and this was spread by Hippocrates, and then of Kos, and then the Galen continued to spread this, so that the Galenic humors became a standard part of it. Went through all of Europe, and wasn't really abandoned until about the 16th century. So that strikes me as a useful. It's history, and history is useful, but so it kind of underlies a great deal of how we look at magic. How immediate is immediate? By the time we got to the Middle Ages, it was they had locked the each of the planets was associated with earth, air, fire, and water. The Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius were air. Earth was Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Fire was Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. And Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces were water. And of course, one doesn't necessarily have to go with that. Even in the modern world, we tend to think in terms of, okay, earth is for solids, air is for gas, liquid is water, fire is plasma. People who do tarot are going to immediately think, yes, the earth is represented by pentacles, and air is swords, and fire is wands, and water is cups, unless of course you're in one of the traditions that says, no, it is the wands that are fire, and the swords that are air. Like, oh, hey, fine, yes. Well, we're not going to go into that right now. That is a cup of worms we don't need to. Traditionally, those are so saving. And as usual, if you're going to look at a lot of pagan altars, mostly Wiccan, but there's some version of it on many pagan altars, and I'm not going to say there isn't leakage there from from Wicca, because Wicca kind of enabled modern paganism to grow. So there may be some of that. So you will see the a certain amount of the symbolism when we're looking at symbols. You see the symbols of, if you'll have a goblet or a bowl, or in heathenry often a horn, to represent the water, and you will have a sword or an athame to represent air, and you will have you'll have a wand or a staff. You know, size doesn't matter in this case, to represent fire and the earth. Sometimes they put a pentacle down, sometimes they'll put a crystal down. I mean, after all, we all love crystals, and we, you know, you got an excuse to put a crystal on your altar. Yeah, look. Oh, and I need one. I've got to have a hematite for grounding, and I've got to have a rose quartz, and isn't this a beautiful geode? And I've got to have. So it's fairly easy to have a symbol on the altar. When you're doing a ritual, you will see these same symbols coming up, but you will see some form of liquid. You can have everything from a cauldron to a goblet, anything that will hold a container that will hold liquid will give you your symbol for water. Fire, generally candles. Candles are easy. If you're outside, you might have a bonfire. That's cool. But I am always confused by the people who put a fire inside the cauldron. It's like, yes, it is going to give you a nice fireproof container that will keep you from burning down your apartment. That's a good idea. But fire inside the cauldron has always confused me. And so, and you know, stones, if you're outside, you got the earth all around you, and air. Okay, sometimes air is often symbolized by incense because it's gaseous. However, you can represent, there's people more and more all the time getting allergic to incense or sage or any of the other things we burn. And so people are using other items to represent air. They will use a feather or a wing or a fan of some sort to represent air, because that's the air movement. They can use, I've seen bubbles. I've seen some very good representations of how else can we represent. Many altars now, especially for kids, but in any place where there are rules against it, will have their little electric candles. Hey, it's got light, and it's got and might be giving off heat. Therefore, it's a perfectly good representation of fire. And as many people will tell you, and I think Starwolf has, you can do it with absolutely nothing except your body. You got your water right there, unless of course you're all dried out. Your body is the earth. Your the air is your breath. That's in case you got my ability to whistle has gone away. And sound is another thing that they use, because what carries sound if not air? I mean, in the absence of. Anytime you are looking to, anytime you are looking to describe or define something, there was an exercise in one of the groups I was in when I was younger, the process, where they said, okay, tell us without using any words or hand motions what here. We'll give you an assignment, say something. And the best way we found to define something was to think about the absence of it. Okay, your word is doorknob. Okay, this is what you use to open a door. If there isn't a doorknob there, you're going to be in trouble trying to open that door. If you don't have water, what happens? It's, if without water, you dry up 60% of our bodies, 60 or 80% of our bodies are water. Air, without air, we'd be dead. What is it? 4 minutes you can live without air. If we need these fire. Well, that's a different. We don't really want fire, but if you get hypothermia and you get too cold, your fire is gone, and you're going to be without it. We need all of them. And even at the very beginning, when Aristotle was coming up with this clever idea, one of his major points was the elements cannot be pure. They cannot exist in a pure form except in concept. In the world, they are always a mix. So when you hear somebody described as, okay, they're a water person, they're a fire person, that's the predominant one. That is not what they are. That they aren't without them. It's almost impossible to find somebody who hasn't got any of one of the elements in them. Now, typically we describe your body as earth, and your air is in the intellect area. It is your mind, and the fire is the energy that you have, and water is your emotions. And in many forms, and especially Wicca, there's the fifth element, which of course we all remember from that, was it 1997 movie, The Fifth Element, where you have the fifth element is spirit, which is a combination of all of them together. So, but they will, if you look at a pentagram, they will often say the fifth point is spirit, but it hasn't got the massive amount of things associated with it that you get associated with in the magical tradition. One of my favorite quotes, I think it's from Isaac Bonewitz, was he said that if you get any ceremonial magician, confront him with 4 of anything, and he will immediately divide them into earth, air, fire, and water. That's just that's the way they think, and that's the way they work. And yes, I have seen them. Isaac himself made the basic Wiccan circle with the chocolate ritual, which had a long, one of the supersized Tootsie Rolls as the wand, chocolate milk in the chalice, what was it? It was earth, air. Earth was earth, air. What it was? Okay, I've blown that one, but he also did one with baseball. He did. You can do any. I've definitely seen. Let's divide the first 4 Star Trek shows into which captain is earth, which captain. Obviously, Picard has got to be air, and Kirk is fire, and water would be Janeway, and Cisco is what's the other one? Anyway, I'm losing my list, my Star Trek. Let's see, water,
earth,
fire, earth. Earth, yes, because he's so grounded. So yeah. Anyway, but there are certain characteristics that we associate with each of them. Earth is associated with being grounded. It is the ground, right? With being practical, with being patient, with being stable, and realistic. And it is also being earth associated with riches, all of the jewels and precious metals and the stuff that, but it can, I like that. It sounds a whole lot better than a lot of some of the other connections that they make with poor old Earth. Earth often gets the short end of the stick. Air is also can be looked upon, can be described badly. Air is about thinking. It's about the mind. It's about logic and communication. Rationality, thinking. It's air is sometimes there's a, well, they don't feel, they don't they don't intuit. Well, everybody has their good parts, and don't look for the absences unless, of course, you're doing that definition exercise I just talked about. Whereas fire is passionate and bold and creative and charismatic, and it's all about warmth and light and change. And water is intuitive, sensitive, imaginative, cleansing. Water is very connecting. Water is considered the universal solvent, not because it can dissolve anything, but it dissolves more things than any other substance does. Water, and because water does dissolve things, it allows things to be mixed. It allows things to be to get together. When you have two things and you put them together in water, in liquid, they are more likely to combine than they are if you just throw them on the ground, or I don't care if you put them through the blender, they're still not, without the water, they're just not going to get together the same way. So each of them has a great has positive attributes, and there's negative attributes which come out when you're seeing a deficit in them. When you get to Galenic theory, when you get to the humoral theory about when you're applying this to people as opposed to anything else, it is when there is a severe imbalance, when there is an excess or deficiency, that will cause pain or disease, and because the key is balance. And so it's a lot easier to describe an excess or deficiency than it is to describe something that's balanced and stable across it. There are, when you look at it, I'd say always start with science, because when you start with science, you could say, what do we know about Earth? Well, generally, it's solid. Most physical things are solid. And one thing about Earth is it includes all of the physical world. So not only does it include stones and dirt, which is nourishing. If it weren't for those 8 inches of topsoil, there would be no life on the planet. So you cannot, if you want something that is valuable, frankly, an acre of topsoil is worth a whole lot more than a pound of gold. So even an acre of gold. But also the plants and animals and other things like that. But plants are frequently looked upon as part of Earth and seen that way. Somebody get that? So, but when they and when we get to the plants, then they get separated into different descriptions of what they do for, and what they are more. Even though they are all earth, they each are put into one of the elemental categories. If you look at air, when the first thing you can't see air, but you can see the effects that air has. Like you can't see your mind. We can see the brain, but we can't see the mind. This is something that really bothers scientists, is that they can't figure out, how can we believe that the consciousness persists after the body dies if there isn't a brain? How can the mind exist? But you see it by the effects. You see air by what it pushes. If you take a balloon and you blow into it, the air in there makes the balloon swell. If you go out in the wind, it will push you. It will push freaking trees down in a hurricane. Air does that. If you have an absence of air, you can't friggin' breathe. You can't live. So air is observed by what it does to things. So it is something that affects things without seeming to be there. I mean, Earth is there. You know, if you get hit by a rock, you know what hit you. But if you have if you have air, you know, what's pushing me? It's an invisible thing. Now, another thing that will push it, and we were talking about water, and water has a lot of unique properties. How many things, when they get colder, expand? Water is the only one, and it's okay. How you do that, I don't know. But water has surface tension, which is another really cool thing. As with alchemy, when you're talking about the humors, when you're talking about the elements, if you look at science first and see what we know about water, water exists in the natural world in liquid, solid, and gaseous form. Very rare that anything else does all of that. So that'll tell you something about water. It's adaptable. And Jane Sibley puts it, because one of the runes is about water. Water always finds a way in. There is nothing that it will keep water from finding a way. It may take a while, but it will find a way to get in through your roof, to get out of your cup. It will. Water is persistent. Water takes the shape of whatever's holding it, which is a cool thing. And therefore, things which we associate with water then embody the characteristics of water. Well, let's look at fire. Fire is the essence of fire, which I have to admit that I tend to think of through my palmistry. A fire hand is the hand of someone who changes things. Fire makes change. Fire in your fireplace will warm you up. Fire on your candle will light the room. I mean, the difference between dark and light is, for humans, huge. Fire takes the light of the sun, holds it in earth, wood, and releases it. When the fire starts again, there's the light and the heat again. It is at which it transforms this hunk of wood into ash. Anything fire touches changes it. Fire is what heats metal to the point that you can change iron into steel. Fire is what cooks your bread and stops it from being, a dough, and turns it into bread. Fire cooks your soup too. Everything that fire touches, it changes. So when I'm doing palmistry, if I see a fire hand, then I know that this is a person who is going to change anything that they are going to deal with. So it's a symbol of change. And so when you go back to the tarot or to the runes, or I mean there are 3 different fire runes. So that is that's the thing. So if you go to the fire, which is the wands, what is a wand? It's a piece of wood, or a staff. It's a piece of wood. It holds the potential for fire. It's got that potential in it, potential energy. It's an amazing thing. So that is, but that's why fire is for change. And of course, let's get back to those ceremonial magicians who want to have something that addresses, they got to have their what's it goes to. If you have the earth is for north. It is generally represented as north. The air is represented as east. I was told that that's because the sun rises in the east. I think it's because the earth spins in that direction. And so it comes, I think it's because the air currents move that way in Europe, where it was started. Fires from the south. Why? Because that's where the heat is. That's in the summer. So waters from the west. Why? I think it's because in Europe, the huge body of the Atlantic is the west. Where I'm from, in my personal magical universe, Earth is to the west, because I got 3,000 miles of land going between me and the next big body of water, and water is in the east. But nobody's gonna listen to me, so that's gonna be a personal thing. Oh well, I'm perfectly happy. They have colors which are associated with them. You're going to see this, and it's green is earth. Gee, now that kind of obvious, and sometimes occasionally they will say it's brown. Air is yellow, probably because it's associated with the intellect or the rising sun. Fire, guess what? Orange, occasionally red. But we will point out that in history, it wasn't until about the 17th century that red and orange were 2 different words. So, so red and orange, fine. But currently we say orange is the color of fire. And blue is for water. Well, that's fine for surface water. But, but that's, I tend to think the air is blue, but that's because it's reflecting back the water. Yes, whatever. But we have to have our correspondences, and that's very important. Another correspondence is that the earth is the root chakra, the air is the heart chakra, the fire is the solar plexus chakra, and the water is the sacral chakra, because of course it is. I'm sorry, it just gets a little bit, it's a little bit hard to once they start adding correspondences, it's just like, oh my gosh. But then it was very heavily, oh gosh, yes, I have to also get to planets associated with them. Earth is Saturn, the ruler of the golden age. Air is Mars. Jupiter was fire, but through thunderbolts. And water was the moon, was associated with the moon. So I mean, at least those all make sense. Earth is associated with the spleen. Air with the gallbladder, fire with the heart, and Gee, what a surprise. Water is the brain, and sometimes nowadays the lungs. So I'm just running through those. I'm not entirely sure it's absolutely necessary that we keep track of those, but it's kind of fun. Earth is the element of winter and of old age. Okay. Air is the element of summer and childhood. Fire is the element of spring and adolescence. I suppose it's because it's when it's warming up. You go from winter to spring, and the fire comes in. And autumn, and most of your life, your mature period, is water, which I suppose I can live with that. But let us go on to more important in some cases, to make your own associations. Yes, we can, but if you want to speak the language of the ceremonial magicians, you have to learn how they use the words. So let us go back to the Galenic, because it was applied pretty darn universally to health throughout the period. And we are looking at the traditional descriptions of types of people. Was what's it called? There's the melancholy part, melancholic personality. Now, the melancholic personality was associated with being sad and depressed. And remember, this is old. This is associated with the end of life. It is also associated with genius and with scholarship, probably because old people, tended to be the brainy ones, oddly enough. And yet you get to, if you look at, I thought it was the brainy, shouldn't that be air? But they are the caloric ones, and color is for the warriors, for the people who are full of blood. No, not blood, yellow bile. Now, okay, they decided that there were 4 humors in the body. There was blood, there was phlegm, there was black bile and yellow bile. I have never had it explained to me. I know what a bile duct is. I know I have, slaughtered animals and taken them apart, and you got to get the gallbladder out so that it doesn't get bile on anything else, or it's going to just be too bitter and you can't eat any food that it spills on. But it was very useful for certain to be used as a chemical thing. But bile is, nobody's ever explained the difference between yellow bile and black bile to me, to my satisfaction. But the people who were full of bile were full of anger, and they were the warriors, and they were the ones that could go out and kill without, changing their personality a lot. Sanguine people, the ones with lots of blood, were cheerful and sweet and happy. And that's, gee, what a surprise, that's for the adolescence and the springtime. But oddly enough, water is the phlegmatic people, the people who, associated with phlegm. If you say phlegm, you're going to think of hawking up a loogie. But phlegm, this is, yes, that does seem to think you're hawking up a loogie. You probably have too much water in your, whatever you're doing. But I don't like the description. They're usually described as having low energy and be apathetic, and each of them has a flavor that's associated with them. which is interesting. Sanguine is associated with sweet. Caloric is associated with bitter and sometimes salty. And melancholy is associated with sour or tartness, but phlegmatic is tasteless. It's supposed to be like clear water. Water has no taste, so but it is associated therefore with apathy or I don't much care. Gee, that's a sad way of looking at it, but you can see that. Now, why does this come into it? It's kind of important because when they were trying in the ancient Greek period and in the early medieval, late medieval, right up through the Renaissance, trying to balance your humors, they would try and make sure that you had less of something. They would add more, they would have less. Charlemagne argued constantly with his doctors. He was obviously caloric and he had too much fire in him and but not fire, air in him. Well, I suppose considering how bright he was, that makes sense. But they always wanted him to avoid roast meat. They wanted him to have boiled meat, which is because that would balance the humor. And he was like, screw that. But every single food, now you can see where a boiled meat would be different than a roasted meat. But every food had its own descriptor. If you go to Culpepper's Herbals, you'd see that a pepper is hot and because this all comes down, these things are based on their little chart. You get hot, cold, wet, dry, and so the earth is dry and cold, but air is dry and hot. You can see it heats, it blow on things and dry it up. But fire and water are water is cold and wet and fire is hot and wet. Now, I'm not quite sure how they get the fire from to be wet, but I suppose it's because how it moves. But probably because they're associating it with blood in some ways. Blood, however, is associated with all four freaking elements. So you can't, even though sanguine is related to blood, all four elements are associated with blood. So whatever. But if you, for instance, when they discovered chocolate in the Americas, immediately they said, okay, what is the humor of chocolate? And they looked at it and it was slightly bitter. But so if you're going to be having your chocolate, then you must have pepper or cinnamon or something like that in it to balance the humors. And that's the way they did a lot of medieval recipes in cooking, is they want to balance. If you had something that was cold and wet, you'd put hot and dry spices on it. If you had something that was cold and dry, you'd put wet spices on it. Hot and wet spices. That was how they worked it out. They wanted to, and then a personal, your doctor, your physician would tell you, okay, you are too caloric, you are too melancholic, you have to eat more of whatever this humor is. And then we get to everybody's favorite thing to hate about the Middle Ages, bleeding and purging. If you have too much blood in you, clearly you have to get you have to be bled and get some of that extra blood out. If you have too much bile or water and you must be purged, which means they give you laxatives and things to make you barf, which is they could see that it would work, because if you were too hot and they took and they bled you, then gee, what's going to happen? You're going to go into shock and you're going to get cold. See how well we treated that fever? We did exactly what we needed, got rid of that fever. They didn't quite understand what they were doing, but they were giving it a shot, and the immediate reactions they were seeing justified it in their own concept. So, and then you look at people and you can see this, there are many references to the elemental personalities in Shakespeare. You see in Taming of the Shrew, you get Kate was too caloric, and Petruchio kept saying, okay, we're both caloric, and therefore you must be, I will tame you, we will take, no, you may not have meat because that will increase the color, and we must domesticate you into a household Kate. Ophelia was too melancholic. So these things were, it was just, like we discuss modern TV shows and books and things, this type of description was a way of, okay, just the way in the last 5 years or so, modern Americans have become comfortable tossing around the terms narcissist and sociopath, and yeah, they were perfectly willing to describe other people. If you were sad and depressed, you're melancholic. If you're angry and emotional, you're caloric. If you're cheerful and outgoing, you're sanguine. And certainly, and okay, and let's just go all the way across. And so you're phlegmatic. You're phlegmatic if you're unemotional and calm, or even sluggish. But we've adapted. If those are just people who don't know anything about the humors, are still going to be using phlegmatic. It's like, okay, they're calm, no matter what goes on, they're just gonna deal with it. If you're sanguine, it means you're happy about something. If you're depressed, then then you're melancholy. If you are caloric, and I don't think people use that very much in the modern world, then you're overly emotional. Oh yeah, there's another one that I almost forgot. I love this one. If you are phlegmatic, then you might have yellow skin, and but if you're sanguine, then of course you're going to have rosy cheeks because you're full of blood. And if you are melancholic, you're going to have white hair. Gee, you think? But did they come up with one for the air? No, they didn't. They said air people have black hair and black eyes. Yeah, right. Most of the people in the Mediterranean area have black hair and black eyes. So are we gonna so every I'm gonna say every crystal, every plant, they had certain, they divided them among, and said this, what characteristic. Part of that has to come with what planet they were associated with, because that's going to go with, remember I started out with these are the planets, the three planets eat three not planets, three zodiac signs are associated with each of these. So those are things that you're going to see when you are dealing with sorry, I'm having a brain fart. These are all things that you do see, that we have, we covered that they have decided that it describes your gender, it describes your disposition, it describes your age, it describes what time of year it is. How do you relate to a particular, when you've decided that you want to have more contact with a certain element, how do you do that? This is where I'm going to go back to Ivo Dominguez. He has a book out, which is lovely. I'm going to put it in the chat. And if you, that won't be in the on the YouTube channel, but so it's the 4 elements of the wise, working in the magical powers of earth, air, water, and fire by Ivo Dominguez Jr. And good book. I haven't quite gotten through it, but it's a lot less. Okay, let's just, don't worry. It's not, this is the basics that you give all of the kindergartners and the first grade in the primary school stuff. That's not what his book is about. His book is about how to use them when you're doing magic, how to bring them into your life. And general rule of thumb, if you want to bring a particular element into your life, go out and surround yourself with it in nature. It's, gee, what a surprise. You want to get to know water? Go to the lake, go to the ocean, go to a river. Oh, what a surprise. You know, go into the woods, do, what do they call it now? Forest bathing, where you just go in there and it cools you down. And other things to help you reach the core essence of these different elements and therefore make your magical work more powerful. Each of those elements are associated with the, you know, corners of the circle. Yeah, circles don't have corners, dear. Yes, whatever, the directions. One of the things that is important, whether it's straight back to Aristotle or up to Ivo, all the elements need each other. All of them feed each other. Water will sink into earth. Fire rises from the earth. The air feeds the fire. They all interact and they need each other, as we need each other, as all the elements in us need each other. So, I mean, going back to the thing I said, I hope at the beginning, you look at the science and what is it that that a sword does? It cuts, it separates, and fire will separate the component parts and release the energy. What is it that water does? It dissolves, it combines, it finds a way. It dissolves and combines. Fire changes, air moves, earth provides stability and holds things. Earth will hold something. It will create a vehicle to keep something solidly there. You don't change the way a crystal, you know, we've had Star Wolf on several times talking about the different properties of different crystals. Those don't change. I don't care if you write a little rune on it or whatever. It's the rose quartz is still going to be rose quartz, and the hematite is still going to be hematite, and the granite is still, which is a composite, so it's probably not a good one, still going to be granite. The urge to water is always going to be downward. It's going to push things down, carry things down. The urge for air is always upward. The urge for fire is stimulation and transformation. Air is going to blow things around. It's going to separate things. Whereas earth is going to hold things together, even, you know, after a flood or whatever, it's going to surround things and settle in, and as the water moves out of it, it's just going to hold it there forever, which is why archaeology works. It's, you're going to have, once the earth is around, it's going to sit there and hold it. I mean, that's probably why we use salt as a element, as a symbol of the element of earth so much, because it preserves. That is a thing that salt does. And trying to think of other things I wanted to mention. Okay, yeah, Eliphas Levi, a while ago, came up with the witch's pyramid, or the Sphinx's pyramid, which was to know, to dare, to will, to keep silent. And those are associated with, guess which? You think to know is going to be the air, because that's the mind. To will is going to be fire. The dare, did I get that right? I do want to tell you the right thing. The air is to know, the will, to will is the fire, to dare is water, because it's to feel something deeply, is to dare is to be motivated, and water is the element of feeling. And guess what? To keep silent is the earth. That kind of makes sense now, doesn't it? But that is the elemental interaction with the witch's pyramid. Which, did he have the elements in mind when he came up with that? I have no idea. But it became closely associated with it during the early years of Wicca. So the I am not entirely certain. That doesn't go back to the premise that any magician is going to, when encountering 4 of anything, isn't going to associate one of them. If you ask me, I'm going to bet you somewhere there is going to be something that is going to tell you which of the fingers are associated with which of the, okay, this will be fire, this is going to be earth, this is going to be air, and that's going to be water. Okay, yeah, that totally works with palmistry. Given 4 of anything, we can figure it out. You can make a correspondence of it. I personally have a very strong antipathy for forcing correspondences. Just because there are 4 of something doesn't mean one is necessarily going to be each of those things, but it's so easy to make them fit into that, especially once you've got 3. The other one, you can twist it around in your mind and make it fit. Oh yeah, I found my note on the early Ayurvedic texts present the theory of 3 humors doses, which they sometimes linked with the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. So there you go. We got like just a couple of minutes. Does anybody have something that they want to throw in? Starwolf, did I forget anything that you've remembered?
Nothing that I can think of. You've covered all of it. For example, I can't remember which of the humors went with which element.
Yeah. Well, which of the humors is, well, sanguine is obviously the
blood, but yeah.
Yeah, because it's fire, they worked it out. And as I said, I worry about forcing correspondences, but
yeah. You get that when you hit like Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice with the, inch thick appendix that is correspondences for everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
I had some thoughts on the associations, and I know you just got done saying how much you worry that we do go too crazy with them.
which I spent an hour telling you what they were, sorry.
Right. Now, the
But
first
it is the beginning and it's where you start. So.
I want to toss in one reference to the 5-element system from Asia, because it has an interesting implications to the 4-element system. They include metal as an element.
And,
Now-
and wood.
And wood.
And wood. And if you take earth, let's say you take hematite, which is earth, it is an ore. If you apply fire to it, it separates into earth and metal, iron and slag. And another tidbit was you talked about, black bile versus yellow bile. I have, especially recently, interpreted both of them are grounded in anger. Yellow bile is for those whose anger is directed outwards, and the black bile is for those whose anger is directed inwards.
Well, that makes
Yes,
sense.
thank you. I think that's important.
Yeah, and I see that because it's a big deal even in psychology, where we look, there are a lot of angry people, but where does that anger go? Either into murder or suicide. And but otherwise, and then as far as the chakras go, you were questioning the association of water with second chakra. Second chakra, well, if we start at the base chakra, that's essentially the source of life, male principle. Second chakra is the female principle, and it's all about intuition and emotion. And I think that's a good fit for water. So, and the third chakra is traditionally yellow, and that is your source of personal power.
No,
And I would put air up at the top, or at 6th, because it's
Well, I just have a hard time with separate when there's 7 chakras and to say, okay, we're only going to count 4. Excuse me.
It depends on who you ask how many chakras there are, because the traditional sources count anywhere from 5 to 8, depending on who you ask. And then you can get into major chakras versus minor chakras. And then we get into the fact that associated colors with the chakras didn't exist as a concept until Isaac Newton broke up light into a rainbow. So none of the traditional sources assign a color.
And we had, and for as language tells us, they didn't differentiate between orange and red. They didn't differentiate between black and blue.
Exactly.
yeah.
And the last that I'm going to toss out is we talk about individuals having an association to an element. That's a water person, it's a fire person. I happened to bump into this in a strange way where I came to realize that my primary element is air with good doses of fire and earth built in. And the interesting thing is what that meant on a practical basis was that I don't ground by focusing my energy and attention down to the earth. I focus it by reaching up to the sky, which I associate with air.
Well, traditionally, you do both. And I always, it bugs me the way we say ground and center when it should be center and ground, because first you bring everything into the center and then you attach it to the rest of the world. So, Feather had a great, very good question. In a practical way, how do you think to implement the elements as you go through your ordinary day? And I think that the way to do that is to work toward balance. If you see that you have either an excess of one of the elements, if you're feeling too sour, melancholy, then you try and reduce that, or you look, okay, what am I having too little of? I've got a little bit. I really want more sanguine. I want more sweet. So you then go for something sweet. which is where we get to things like comfort eating.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna say, like, for preparing breakfast, for instance, how do you start your day with respect to the elements? Do you use fire to cook
if you're
some
feeling
eggs and then-
phlegmatic and have no freaking energy, then what you want to do is you want to get more energy. And so you might go for either more sanguine, more caloric, which, you know, we don't want to have you be angry, but we do want, for instance, salty or bitter flavorings. This is why
Oh, no.
I immediately go to
Coffee.
food, because food is accessible and you can go to the thing that tastes good. I would far rather add a little bit more of what's going to balance than try and take away some of what's going to balance.
Right.
But if
and
you're
what about-
feeling apathetic and flavorless, then you want to add the other. If you're feeling too phlegmatic and too watery, then you want something drier. You want something sweet and or bitter, salty, or I mean, look at how many herbal things are bitters, which
Oh, yeah.
do
Mhm.
things that enhance your digestive system and make your body work better. Heck, the base level part of chocolate, taste of chocolate is bitter.
Mhm. And the
Of
fascinating thing about-
coffee is bitter. This is why
Yeah.
when you're feeling phlegmatic first thing in the morning, you have coffee. It's-
I was actually thinking less of humors and more perhaps in terms of how you prepare your breakfast. For instance, say you use fire to cook the eggs. Use earth to grow, earth grows the vegetables or fruits that you might add to your breakfast. Water prepares the waters in the juice, for instance, or coffee that you might have. And air, I don't know, maybe you whip the eggs real well. But I was thinking that kind of thought of finding balance in how you prepare things, perhaps for breakfast, and it could be in the choices you make for the foods too.
As well as the making of it.
Yeah.
That's an
well,
interesting.
remember your Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Well,
Eat what you want.
His doctors told him that if you've got too much color, you want to have more. You want to have more of the water to balance it off.
I guess I'm thinking more in a modern sense of how
Yeah.
one might apply them. If you wanted to dress in a balanced way, you might use red for fire and,
Yeah.
So
or black for grounding, or
Yeah.
depending on the way you're going to deal with, or green for grounding.
or if it's going to be a difficult day at work, maybe you want something calming and cool, so you wear blue.
Yeah.
But
Also
if you
wanted
can
to close
look
off-
at those things and you can work it. I'm going to I'm going to actually
Call it an end.
Yeah, okay, right.
I'm going to call it and turn off the recording, but if I can do that. Thank you all for coming, and going to, there it is, click it and stop the recording. Thank you all for being